Hello and welcome to this webinar on how to rock the new features in Articulate Storyline 3. We're glad to have you here. My name is Adam Cannon. I'm the host of this webinar. I'm a e-learning evangelist specializing in storyline and instructional design here at eLearning Brothers. And we also have on the call with us Bill Milstid, and I'll let him introduce himself. Kind of talk about his experience and things like that, and then we'll go ahead and kick it off.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Bill Milstid. I'm a senior developer designer here at eLearning Brothers, and I don't know if I'd say specialize, but I certainly focus on Storyline, and now that it's out, Storyline 3, so we've got a lot of pretty interesting things to share with you today. Looking forward to doing so.
Thanks, Bill. So just as a couple of items of housekeeping as we get started, this webinar is being recorded, and as within just a couple hours of it ending, we will send out a link to all registrants, as well as within a couple of days we will post a webinar recap on our eLearning Brothers blog page so that you will be able to view it there as well. In that webinar recap, we will also try to answer any questions that maybe we didn't get to during this time. If you haven't yet, I see some of you have found the questions tool in the GoToWebinar interface. We will be using that, so please feel free to jump in and ask any questions. We do have, besides Bill and I, we have Andrew Townsend on the line, who is kind of our webinar guru, and he'll be monitoring those questions and flagging them for us to answer, and we will try to answer them as we go. We're kind of breaking this into like 4 sections, and we'll take some time at the end of each section to answer some questions. If we don't get to yours, please understand that we will do our best to get to it in that webinar recap, or you're welcome to shoot us an email as well and contact us. So let's get going on this. So I wanted to start with just a question, and this is where you can use the question panel to respond. About how many hours on average do you spend in a typical project that you create in Storyline, whether that's Storyline 1, 2, 3, or 360? And I know it's hard because there's not really any such thing as a typical project, but think about your typical projects as far as length and things like that. So we're getting 80, 40 to 60. Somebody says they haven't started using it. 120. 40 seems to be a common response. 40, 60, 80, right in that time frame. So some of them are up above 120, 150. Of course, as we all know, it really depends on the complexity of the course and how much you're doing, how much interactivity you're doing, and if you're doing a bunch of JavaScripting or customization, things like that. So let's go into the next question here. So this will be a poll question, and so you'll just see the poll answer. So this should pop up on your screen. So what's the level of familiarity with Storyline 3 or 360? So we'll give that about 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. And so you can see that there's quite a few who use it regularly, several who have said they've read about it, some who said they've downloaded it but haven't played with it. A few have been, I've used the demo version, so forth. So it looks like there are people who use Storyline regularly, Storyline 3, 360, so that's good. So you may be familiar with some of these features, but there's also about almost half who have read about it or downloaded it but haven't played with it. So that's good as well. So we're going to jump in and get started on our key talking points now. So one of the main things about Storyline 3 is that some of these new features can save you a lot of time and headache in your course development, especially over some of the earlier versions of Storyline. They put in a lot of things that people have been asking for over the life cycle of Storyline, and there's a lot of new features here, and we'll go over some of the key ones that Bill and I think are either the the most valuable in terms of time saving, or the ones that people seem to have been asking about the most. Just a note, we're focusing on Storyline 3 today, and Storyline 360 right now and Storyline 3 are very similar, if not almost practically identical in terms of their features and functionality. However, as time goes by, they're going to start to diverge a little bit more, at least according to Articulate. And so just understand, we are focusing primarily on Storyline 3, and while the features that we're covering are also in 360, the focus is on Storyline 3. So we're going to go over one of the new features is tables, and then we'll go over motion paths and triggers, and we're going to look at closed captions and triggers, and then we're going to look at a new feature that isn't always listed on the Storyline documentation as a new feature, but it's something that Bill is really good at, and it talks about bringing in graphics into your course, and particularly EMF graphics. So let's start. I'm going to close this window so that you can see my Storyline course. So we're going to talk about tables. Tables are one of those things that people have really been asking a lot about. That can save you some time and organization. They can help you in your accessibility as you create things, and they're actually pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. If I come in here, maybe I'll change the background just to give it a little color here. And then I'm going to go up to my Insert tab, and then I'm going to insert the table. And just like with Word or PowerPoint or any of the familiar familiar things, we're going to pull in a table that's, we get to choose the size, and you don't have to worry about, if you make a mistake, you can always go back later and add more rows to it. And so to start off with, I can decide, I've got this color drop down here. I can choose, maybe I want, instead of the blue, I want the red. And these colors come from your color scheme that you've got selected. If I had a different color scheme selected, it would do it. Over here on the left, I can choose if I want header row or banded rows. Maybe I don't want the banded rows, but I want the header row. I can go in and choose my border. Say maybe I want a thicker border, and I want that border color to be, maybe a darker red, and then I'm going to say I want this to just be the outside border. And so I can see that in there. And so then I can go in and I can say, start adding in some, so I can go in and maybe say ID number, name, department, and we'll do a status just for my things. And if I don't want these two columns, I can just highlight them and right-click and go to delete columns. So I can do that. I can stretch the table out more if I want it to fit. I can go in. You notice as I move the arrow to the end of the row, I get this black arrow that tells me I'm going to select the whole row. So then I could go up and say I want to center it horizontally, center it vertically on there, and then I could go in and I could start adding some information into that. And so we'll do that really quickly here. And we're going to say full-time is his status. Maybe we come down here. And we say, and so forth. And if I wanted to add another row, I can just tab from the last thing here and it adds another row. And then I can just add in And so it's pretty slick. One of the nice things about this is, you know, I've got this formatted. I can go in now and I can format the cells. If I wanted to make each of these, you know, the full-time cells a different color, I could click and drag the part-time and do, you know, go to the fill and say I want those to be a darker red, and then the full-time, oh, excuse me, I want full-time, I control click, and then I can fill those as I want. One of the nice things too on a table is if you go to your home tab, and then you've got tab order here, I can click tab order. Now I can start to give it some titles. You see I've got an untitled slide right here with table 1. By default, the alternate text that your screen reader is going to read is going to be a table with 4 columns and 6 rows. If I wanted to change that and just say, you know, employee status table with 4 columns. First column is ID number, if I could spell, and I could fill it in, you know, so I could indicate something like that, and then I could say, you know, this is ID number, this is employee name, and so forth. And so I can go in and I can customize it to what the screen reader is going to read. So tables are pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to, you know, I would just encourage you to go in and play with them. They're not that hard to use, but it's a great feature to save you some time in Storyline. So I'm going to look through, see if there are any key questions out there we've got. Let me just look through the questions panel before I send it off to Bill. You can bring in tables from other applications, like from Excel and so forth. If you wanted to make one thing that a table doesn't do is it doesn't let you put a hotspot in a cell, or a link, a hyperlink on a cell. It just hyperlinks the whole table. So if I wanted to make this cell clickable, I would come in here and I would insert a hotspot, a rectangular hotspot right on that cell, and then I could say, you know, take it to wherever, and change the trigger here to be whatever I wanted it to be. If I wanted to, you know, add a trigger to, you know, you can add a trigger to a table. So you could say when the user clicks on the table, or when the mouse hovers over a table or whatever, you could show a layer, things like that. So a table is an object that you can add triggers to. It's not as fully featured as you know, as some of the other features in Storyline, in terms of you can't have like animations and things in there. But you could, you know, use the table sort of as your guideline, and then add some shapes and things in there. The other thing with the tab order too is you can have it, you know, tell what order you want it to go in. So if I wanted it to read another column first, I could, you know, say change this up or down, you know, and then there's got the plus or minus sign here. I can move these. I can create that custom tab order by saying, now I want this to be the Mike Baxter to come first in terms of what the screen reader is going to read. And if I make a mistake, I can reset the order. There's a question: can variables be used as cell content? Can a table be interactive for a user? Not sure what exactly interactive for a user means. You can create it to where they can enter the data. If I go here and I say, you can take a table, and if the table gets too long, for instance, I can insert it into a scrolling window so that they can scroll vertically. If I go in and I say I want to add a text entry field, so I can go in and make, resize that. You notice it doesn't, if I preview that now, so I could go in here and I could say, and it then becomes a text entry field in that way, and you notice that it resized to kind of fill the cell once I moved it into there. If I wanted to put a variable in there, I would need to have a variable selected, created, and a reference to it. So it doesn't look like I can put a variable reference in there in a table. Some of these things I'm still playing with. So the tables aren't completely, fully functional. They're there mainly to store data and to hold it. But hopefully, as time goes by, we'll get more interactivity in the tables. But again, it's designed for very specific things. So we're gonna go ahead and jump on as I've looked at some of these questions. So the point of the screen reader. Sorry, one more question there. The point of the screen reader is if you've got obviously someone who is visually impaired, that they could have that screen reader read it to them, and it would tell them what the contents of the table were. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the presenter over to Bill and let him take over and go from there.
All right, guys. Hopefully everybody can see my screen here. I'm going to be using a few examples as we go through. But I'm going to be talking first about a really simple thing with motion paths. I use a lot of motion paths, right? This is an example I've got up here from a previous game that we just built for Storyline 3. As you can tell, there's a lot of motion paths going on. And in Storyline 2 and before that, the way that those were handled, well, they weren't all that terribly easy to manage, mostly because of naming. Look up top here in this motion path area. We can see we've got line motion path 45, and that was kind of the extent of it, right? I personally end up losing track of exactly what line motion path 45 is pretty quick, but I still have to sort through a lot of motion paths in a lot of the work that we're doing. And in situations where we've got a lot of them, or where more importantly we've got triggers that use or rely on motion paths, let's say for timers or something like that, which I can explain in a moment, managing your motion paths is actually kind of a headache often in Storyline. But in Storyline 3, we can name these motion paths, which is pretty cool. So instead of motion path 45, line motion path 45, we can have, in fact, a line motion path called up. I don't know if you can see that here. Now, I've got that pulled together so I can show you really quickly how to do it. Obviously, the practical aspect of it is remarkably simple. You add a motion path to an object, select that motion path, and then change its name to whatever is most descriptive for you. Okay, so that clearly makes a ton of sense, but let's look at a practical example of that. In my game, for instance, and this is something I do a ton of on a day-to-day, I use a lot of off-screen objects for timers. As you get into more kind of complicated interactive work, that type of thing pops up, and one of the easiest ways to have a repetitive action occur on screen is to use a timer. Those are generally controlled by a combination of triggers and motion paths. In the past, Storyline 2, mostly for simplicity, so that I could tell which path was on which object doing which trigger, I would basically use one object with a motion path on it, trigger that animation. When that was finished, I would have a second object with a different motion path that would be triggered, and so on and so forth until I got the number of kind of chains of events that I was looking for. With the ability to name motion paths, you can actually simplify that a heck of a lot, right? So for me, I'm now able to kind of condense the number of objects on screen that I'm using at any given time when I'm using kind of complex triggers. So for example, that previous example where I had 2 off-screen timers, going forward in Storyline, I'm actually going to be able to reduce that down to 3 and name the 2 different motion paths that I'm using as timers, timer 1 and timer 2. So a quick example of how that kind of a thing might work. We would trigger an animation here to occur on an event. In this case, I've set it up for when the user presses an M key. Once that's done, timer 1 animation is going to complete, or is going to move. Object or oval 1 is going to move on timer 1. When oval 1 is done moving on timer 1, it's going to move on timer 2. And then once oval 1 is moved on timer 2, it's going to move again on timer 1, and we're going to create this kind of repetitive motion back and forth after a user event. And that's what we've done here in this example. No motion whatsoever. I press M. I get our object to move on 2 separate motion paths, which we could have always done in the previous versions, but now a heck of a lot easier for me to maintain those and manage them in my triggers pane. All right, so I kind of blew right through that pretty quickly, I suppose. Does anybody have any questions about that before I move on to a pretty interesting effect that we've got? More than one motion path? Yes, it is. Okay, so we had 2 questions. Looks like we answered them. If anybody has any quick ones, please feel free to dump them in. Otherwise, I'm going to move past that and into another topic. Storyline has a new trigger called object intersection. There's actually a number of events kind of tied to that. We've got an object intersection ends. These 2 things we're going to quickly look at. Basically, they kind of perform exactly as they sound. We might have 2 objects on screen. We want one of these objects to change behavior when it intersects with a secondary object. Use cases for that we can talk about in just a moment, but I'm going to show you how I did exactly that. So I've got this circle, object on screen right here. I've set it up with 2 different states. We've got a normal state and an intersect state. Got a square as is. I want this circle to change colors when it intersects with this square, and then I want it to stop doing that when it moves past the square. Now, very simple thing to do. We change the state of oval 1 to the intersect state that we've set up when the object intersects with the rectangle on screen. We change the state of oval 1 back to normal when that object intersection ends. Okay? Very simply, that can occur pretty much whenever you want. I've got 2 examples right now that I'm going to play through and show you how it works. One of these occurs when you drag the circle over the square. You're going to see a color change, and then again when it comes back off. And then the next example I'm going to give you to show, I'm going to just play through here, is it doing it with a motion path. And then we're going to talk very quickly about how you could use that. So our first example that we've got here, we've got our circle and our square. This is the one that's going to change colors when I drag over it. So as I drag my circle, you'll notice it changes to red as it begins to intersect with the square, and back to a normal state as you release and it moves past that square. Alternatively, you can have the object intersection occur on animations, or really in a number of other scenarios, right? So why is that useful? How is that effective? Well, there are a couple things. One, we think about the fact that in Storyline you can trigger events over here based on object states. So imagine we had a 3rd object off screen here that we wanted to hide whenever this interacted with this. Well, we could trigger that very simply, detecting an object intersection. Or if we had multiple actions that occur, say we have multiple states, those change state based on a number of variables. I'm kind of going off the rails here. Point is, we've got a lot of things we can do with this. There's any number of ways that you can stack this object intersection together with other triggers that Storyline has, variables, etc., to create some interesting effects and get some more complicated interactive, interactions, I suppose, with Storyline. An example of how that's done is back to this game that we were showing you. Throughout multiple levels of this game, we've got bad guys. They throw stuff at our main character here. They run across the screen and they attack our main character here. And when they do that, they, of course, as in any good game, they impact your health or negatively impact you in one way or the other. By and large, the way that we're doing that in this game that I'm loading here to show you kind of quickly what that looks like is with object intersection. Simple storyline, standard triggers. So as this loads, you can see I've got a character who moves across the screen here. My little health meter is up at the top right. And as I'm moving across the screen, there will be some bad guys that move out and they make contact with me. And as they do, we lose some health in our little health amulet in our game here. Okay. So pretty specific example, but I think, you know, maybe it's pretty applicable. All right, so do we have any questions on this stuff? Make an object.
So there are a few questions. I don't know if you're seeing the question panel, but we can jump in.
Looking at that right there. Sorry, I'm trying to scroll through it.
That's all right.
Thanks. Yeah, would you mind jumping in there? Because it's still not running out for me.
So one question is how good is the accuracy of the timing of motion paths?
Yeah, timing of motion paths is great. I actually, you know, you can get it down to as fractional of a second as you want, and you know, depending on what you're doing, you know, as long as you're not trying to sync up motion paths with like specific points of audio or video, you know, getting too crazy with it. I've yet to run into any issues really using timers and specific timing on motion paths.
Okay. Another one is how do you make an object draggable, which may not be right along the lines of motion paths, but it's something you showed, so it's a question that's being asked.
Fair enough. Yeah. So that was actually kind of just a little hack to show you guys without setting up, you know, a full interaction here. Really what I did in that case, just to kind of get that drag option available, is I set up a dummy trigger. So I've got adjust a variable, it's a blank variable, when that oval is dragged over the rectangle. Now with that, you know, for instance, you could very well, I mean, it's not directly tied to object intersection or, you know, motion paths per se, but you can use that kind of basic approach to trigger any number of effects that you want to create kind of custom interactions. So imagine you drag that circle over the square and then you change the state to hidden once that occurs. Without using, you know, convert to freeform, you can actually kind of play around with some of this stuff pretty simply. All right.
Great.
Okay.
And then there's one more that just says, can you show how to add a motion path, or is that too basic?
No, not too basic at all. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to go ahead and add a blank slide and add an object to it. So let's grab a circle here again. Draw a circle. We go up to animations, right? You've got your intro, your exit animations, and then add motion path. Several options here that are built in. We're just going to add a basic line motion path. By default, it'll drop it down. You choose path options. You can adjust the direction. So let's make it a right shape. We're going to drag it out a little bit so it's further. You can adjust the timing up in the timing panel. Your name goes here. All right, object off screen, let's say. And then additional path options. You know, you can change the easing of your motion paths, which is actually adjust the style of animation or the way that the animation itself plays, as well as the speed of the easing, direction, and relativity of the start point or not, right? If you have any questions on what those mean, I'm sure we can address them a little later, or I think we may have some articles about that stuff up on eLearning Brothers as well.
Yeah. Just to address, there was a question about how did you get the girl to walk, and I think I'm going to point them at your previous webinar that was all focused on the game, because I do believe you addressed that in that webinar. So we'll maybe, Andrew, we can make sure we send out the link to that webinar recap that they can look at as well to find out how to get that girl to walk in the Evelyn's Quest.
Yeah, no problem. We'll get that sent out in a follow-up email.
Okay, and then there's one more question. Is there any way to add the motion path backwards, like have it on stage where you want it to end up, and the motion path can be edited to show where it starts?
Absolutely. So if I'm understanding exactly, I think it's a pretty simple thing. So let's just start over here. We're going to go ahead and put a square on screen for our shape. And we want it to end up in this spot, right? We want it to end up dead center. We say we want it to start off the right-hand side of the screen. One way to do that would obviously be to, apply, start it where you want it, apply motion path, drag it to the end. Alternatively, you can start where you want to finish. So, and that's actually what I do. So we click our object, add a motion path, make it a right, a shape going right. We wanted it to end up, or to start out over here and end up over here. You'll notice that you've got a green dot and a red dot. It's your starting position and your ending position of this motion path. If you want to reverse that, you can click Path Options and then go down to Reverse Path Direction. And then with one click, you end up with this, which is an animation, your object placed in the final resting position, and then you've got a reverse animation going here. One note about that, one thing to know, if you're going to do that based using triggers, right, so that maybe this thing doesn't animate until after X event occurs, you're going to want to pay attention to either the intro animations or your actual states, your initial states on that object. So you may want to consider hiding an object, before it animates, if you're going to be using triggers and this method. If that was more confusing than it needed to be, I apologize. But there you go. All right.
Okay. So that looks like all the questions on that. So we'll jump back in now into another section that I'm going to do, which is on closed captioning. So I'm going to, let me take over the screen here again. All right, so you should now see my storyline project. What I'm going to do here is we're going to talk about inserting closed captioning and articulate this newest version of Storyline is pretty slick in this regard. If I go in and let's look at my folder right here. You can see that in the folder I've got a video file, this just cc_sample.mov. I also have a SRT file, a subtitle file with the same name, the cc_sample name. And so the nice thing is when I go in and I insert this video, and I say insert from file, and I go out here and I'm in my folder and I grab that and I bring it in, it's going to grab that SRT file, which is one of the file formats for closed captioning, and it's going to pull that in automatically and sync it up with the video for the most part. And so we'll show you that here in just a second as this imports in. This is just a little cheesy video that I found online. It's a portion of an old black and white movie. The sound isn't great quality, the picture's not great quality, but it demonstrates what we're looking at. And I'll go over how I created the SRT file in a minute. We'll talk about that. We'll also show you how you can create the captions right in Storyline as well. So I've got the video in there. So if I were to just play this right now, and the dialogue actually starts a few seconds in, I can click that closed captioning button, and the dialogue should start here in just a second. And so you can see that it put the captions in without any work for me. I just had to have that video in there. So there's a lot of YouTube videos and things that already have those caption files included, or those subtitle files included, and you can bring them in. But if I didn't like that, maybe they weren't synced up where I wanted them to be or whatever, I can go in and I can edit the captions. It's going to tell me in this case you're about to edit an imported closed caption. It's going to be changed. If you don't want to do that, you can create a backup. So if I wanted to create a backup, I would click the export button here, and I could just call it, I could go into my folder here and I could call it the CC sample, and then maybe do underscore backup and just call it like that. And then I've got a backup file. Now I can go in and edit the captions. And it comes in. And for whatever reason, this video doesn't show the captions here because it's there, but I can go in and import now captions that I've created, and I can grab this Sherlock Holmes, because this is a video about Sherlock Holmes, and it puts it in, and it's already there. If I wanted to go in and say I want the lady to say, you know, this name, this word, and then the man is saying this one. It's that simple. Okay, so I can go in and I've got it there. If I wanted to split it, if I thought this was too long, I can click on that. I can split it out to where, you know, to where there's more than one. I can add another one in if I wanted to say right here, I wanted to insert one. If I wanted to say, you know, so I've got it there, I can insert it, I could type something in. There's no dialogue going on here, but I could insert it there if I wanted to. I could, you know, whether it's a just a stage direction kind of thing or whatever. But so I can go in there and then I can save that. And then when I preview it, and I click my captions button, you'll see that it comes in here. And you can see now that it's got the lady. And the nice thing about that editing is now I can sync it up exactly to start when they start talking, so that I make sure it's synced up all correctly. As far as changing the alignment and so forth, right now Storyline just puts the captioning file for you right there at the bottom of that slide. There, you can't change where that caption appears. You can change the font though of the caption over here in by going to your Home tab and then going to your Player options. And give it just a minute to pull up here. And so where it says color, I click on the colors and effects, and then you see right here my captions font. If I wanted to choose a different font, you know, if I wanted it to be this Railway extra bold, I can choose that. I can also increase that size a bit. So if I wanted it to be 120%, now let's look at it and see if that took effect. We'll turn on the captions. So you can see it's bigger now. So you can't change the color of either that little caption box. You can't change the color of the font right now, but you can change the font and font size. In addition, if I wanted to say, I don't want to show, you know, I'm back here in the player, and I want to turn off my captions control because I want to create it, or I want to have maybe a clean player that doesn't have, you know, I don't have all these extraneous pieces on there. And so I'm going to click OK. I want to go in here and take off, you know, my previous and next buttons because I'm going to create my own custom ones. The nice thing is I can create a trigger that says adjust variable, and the variable is player display captions, and the value by default is false. I can change it to true, and I can change it with a button if I want to create my own, or I can even say, you know, when the timeline starts on this video. And so I click OK, then I click preview, and the captions will start right away. There's no button there for me to click, and so without me clicking, they are in there. So I didn't have to click anything, those just come right in. And so you can create the caption file. There are countless ways that you can create those caption files. I used a program, just called Subtitle Edit. It's a free program, and you can pull the video in and look at the waveform and then create the captions there. You can also do it directly in a notepad file, and there's instructions for how to do that. That's a bigger discussion for later. But as we look at captions, you can see it's going to be a big deal as far as helping you again with your accessibility, changing. It's quick and easy, especially if you've got a video that you've already created the captions for. To pull it right in. If you just give it that same name as your caption file, like we did here in this folder, where I have the cc sample mov MOV, and then this cc sample.srt. That's the original one that was created with it, that the video came with. I didn't like that one, so I went out to this subtitle edit and I created my own called Sherlock Holmes. And again, because they talk about Sherlock Holmes in the video, I just called it that, and I can bring that in and edit it. If I didn't have a caption file and I wanted to do it, it's the same principle as I was using when I edited the captions. I can just go right in there, and we look at the first part of this video that doesn't have any. If I come up here, there's no captions, so again, I can just add it. It brings in, as I stretch it out, it tells me what I want to do, and then I just double click in there and I can type, and the video plays while you're typing, and so you could actually hear it. You can pause it, play it again and again just by clicking on it and letting it play again, so that you can make sure you get it right. So that's a real quick and easy primer on the caption. So if you have a video that currently does not have an SRT file, you can go in here and create it, just like I've shown you. You can take the video in and just by creating the captions, you can do it. You could import a caption file if you had one created as well. The question is, how would I use closed captioning with narration in a traditional e-learning course? Well, you could, if you've got an audio narration going, then it's the same kind of thing. You can, if I go in and I insert audio, let me go grab an audio file here. When I click on the audio file, you can see that I've got it selected. Now I can go in and add captions to that audio file. And again, it's the same thing. I've got the waveform here. I can listen, and I can type it in. If I could type. So I've got something like that. So I can just type it in, save it, and then it's there. The color of the caption is not based off of your color palette, as far as I've been able to determine. It is always that sort of charcoal gray color. But there's not a lot of functionality as far as customizing the captions. I'm hoping it will come in future releases that you can determine where on the slide your captions appear, so that if you have things happening in this bottom section of the slide, that you could make it appear at the top, or you could change the color based on who was speaking, things like that. Right now, that's not possible. The only way you can do it is to put in an indicator of the name, like I did, or a description, like lady is saying this. Storyline does not automatically create a caption file for you, but you can go in and create them yourself. The question comes, and this is maybe a more generic question: will Storyline 3 files open in Storyline 2? No, it goes one way, but not the other. Once you've created a file in Storyline 3, it doesn't open in Storyline 2. It's a newer version. But if you've got a Storyline 2 file, you can create it and you can open it in Storyline 3. So, yeah, someone asked, can you preview the captions on the audio file? And I'm going to create a new slide just to move them, just to move that audio file to the new slide. So I'm going to go grab the audio from here and cut it and then paste it on here. And so now if I preview this slide, oh, and I turned off. I didn't put the trigger on that slide, so I need to put the trigger in that says adjust the variable, display captions when timeline starts on the slide. So I say OK. Now I preview it. So it didn't bring in the captions when I copied it, but I can go in and I could go in and edit those captions and change them out. Oh, it did. Oh, because I have it set to unassigned, so I need to change the value to true when the timeline starts, and then when I preview the slide, it should show you the... So you can see that that's just a quick preview of the audio. So again, there are lots of different types of caption files, and captioning in itself, you know, how to create and all the different questions around that is a webinar all in itself. So I just wanted to show you quickly how Storyline does it. There are more questions coming across as far as, you know, if camcorders can do it. What I will try to do is try to find more information on that. I'm actually going to write a whole blog on closed captioning and Storyline, and I will address those things as I create the blog, and you'll be, you know, you'll be able to find that blog on the eLearning Brothers site. So once again, I will turn it back over to Bill for the final portion of this.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so well, first thing I wanted to know, really, 1 to 5, how complicated can Storyline 3 custom shapes get? You guys have been in there. A lot of you guys are working on a pretty regular basis. What do we think? How complicated? I'll give it just a few seconds here. All right. Yeah, so it looks like right now we're right around 40% of respondents are saying, you know, like 5, you can draw just about anything in Storyline 3. And then we've got a few people kind of towards the bottom end of that, but it looks, you know, 3 to 5 is our average there. So just want to pop up a second question there, if you guys don't mind. And so since we said that, so sure, if we can draw just about anything in Storyline 3, let me ask this, and how labor intensive would it be to draw something completely custom, you know, detailed shapes in Storyline 3, right? So let's think about budget here, let's think about time, and 1 to 5, super simple, or 5, you know, custom crazy shapes, totally just not worth the time and money. All right, just a couple more seconds here. Yeah. So everybody was, you know, on average, folks were pretty positive about the capabilities that Storyline had, right? You guys all seemed to vote that it was certainly had a lot of control over the custom shapes, but it also does seem to look like maybe super crazy stuff might be a little bit out of the realm of possibility here. So I'm going to share my screen here with you guys. And I just want to blow through a few Storyline screens, if you don't mind, real quick. So this first thing that I've got up here, got a bunch of shapes, right? So these are all custom shapes in Storyline. No big deal, right? We've got different kind of a stroke here, gradient stroke shown, etc., etc. And clearly we could do that with relative ease in Storyline. Sorry about that. I guess I hit the wrong button. But I'm going to show you some other stuff too, and we're going to talk about how we did it and how you can do it as well. All right, so basic shapes, no problem. Also got some more kind of complicated stuff that we can do in Storyline. This is all just one, you know, custom shape. It's a hexagon. On the right-hand side, I've got the native Storyline version of a hexagon, which you know, you don't have as much control over. Certainly not as pretty as and refined maybe as the one on the left, right? In terms of like our corner radius, things like that. Our next screen that I'm showing here, hopefully you guys will get to see some of the animation that was on it, but if not, no worries. These are also custom shapes, and if you'll notice, I've got maybe some image masking starting to go on here. I don't know if you guys can tell what's started. Last screen here, showing a little bit more detail with, again, native, or not necessarily native, but custom storyline shapes. Some errors on the right-hand side from testing I can explain in a bit. But finally, what I really wanted to show you guys as we're kind of walking through, and you can see that there are some more kind of, you know, more and more complicated stuff going on here. What I really wanted to share with you guys is this stuff towards the end that we're going to start to see here. And what I've got on screen right now, I don't know how well it's playing with my connection at the moment, but I've got a gentleman in a boat, and he's got a fishing rod, and he's got an oar on the side of his boat, and he's kind of moving back and forth a little bit. That is a completely custom shape in Storyline, and I'll show you what I mean by that. If I wanted to, I can access the gentleman in the boat's hat and change his color, change that hat color with a simple click. Now it's red. And I think I want to make his shirt red, and I think I want to make his arms yellow, because why not, right? Now, that, right, these kind of custom vector shapes in Storyline has not been something we've been able to do in the past. It's something that I've personally been craving for a very, very long time. And even though we can do it, great, right, there was kind of a concern about whether or not budget would be limiting, or really just the practicality of it would be I guess, viable. Because Storyline 3 accepts a lovely file format called an EMF, we can now bring custom shapes like this into Storyline with very, very, very little overhead, very little time to do it. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do that, if you don't mind. First thing I did to test this, I actually went to the eLearning Brothers library, and I grabbed a stock file. I grabbed an EPS. That was this globe, a couple of books put together, and I decided I wanted to bring that into Storyline to make a custom shape. So the first thing that I did, and this is a part that we're not going to show you because you got to go into Illustrator and whatnot, or another tool. First thing you got to do is actually get your file that you're looking for, whatever graphic vector shape it is, and convert it to an EMF. That's a very simple process in Illustrator. Some files come natively in that format. You can also export EMFs, I believe, from PowerPoint and a number of other Windows-based, you know, non-Adobe products. So maybe look into that. I'll try to pull together some resources for the future, you know, for posting if possible. But by and large, if you have an EMF and you can bring it into Storyline like any other picture, you can get super crazy, awesome custom vector graphics. So I have this EMF here. I brought it in as any other method, Control-J, or, you know, insert picture. You get your EMF brought in. Thing about EMFs is that they're actually a combination of vector and raster data, so when they come into Storyline, they kind of look a little not great, very pixelated. You can't control the individual objects that might be in that EMF, and they're certainly not where we need them to be for animation or compiling into a scene. So the next step is actually to break that picture apart. You brought in this JPEG, right? Or not JPEG, I'm sorry, this EMF, this standard image. All you got to do is select it and press Shift-Control-G. Once you do that, you'll notice your shapes kind of become a little different. This picture is not this picture anymore, right? What Storyline's done is it's actually taken the vector data that was contained in this EMF file, and it's converted it to custom shapes for you. The problem that it seems to have is that it has a lot of difficulty parsing out where those custom shapes should be stacked, right? So how they should be layered. You'll notice you've just got a bunch of freeform shapes on this screen instead of an image, and they're all right, they're all good, they're all great to use. You just have to go in and then rearrange them and change the ones that are at the top generally to the back and the ones that are at the back generally to the top. And once you do that, you now have completely custom, scalable, editable vector graphics in Storyline to use as you see fit. So I basically took these shapes that came out of this raster graphic that we broke apart, I rearranged them onto screen the way that I wanted them, and then I added some animation to them individually and as a group to enter onto the screen. If at any time I decide, I don't know if you guys got to see that animation, but if at any time I decide that I want to change the color, again, of any of these objects, it's a simple click of a button. If I want to add animations to the individual objects in these custom shape groups, I can do exactly that by selecting the individual freeform shape that Storyline created and editing it. So, anybody have any questions about that? Or is there anything else I can share to help clear that one up?
There are a few questions in here. What's the benefit of creating custom shapes in Storyline 3 instead of another graphics tool?
Yeah, time. So, well, actually, hold on. Could you restate that question for me to make sure that I answer it properly instead of answering it what I thought I heard?
What is the benefit of creating custom shapes in Storyline 3 instead of another graphics tool?
Yeah, so I would say editability, right? And clarity, quality, and size. Those would be the big things I'd aim for. So like this graphic that I'm showing on screen, we could very easily insert all of these into Storyline as a PNG, right? We've got 4 individual PNGs. I could animate those in individually. But then if I need to edit those later on, change the color, change the content, turn off an element of them individually, I've got to go back to that third-party tool and edit. If instead I bring those graphics in as EMFs, break them apart and keep them as custom shapes, I can do most of my editing inside of Storyline. So again, back to color, but I can also change those shapes and move them around directly in the tool. Beyond that, they're scalable. So there's no real upper limit to the size. We've moved officially from a raster graphic to a vector graphic. And in doing that, that means, obviously any resolution somebody's looking at, the quality is always going to be perfect. It's effectively an SVG. I mean, in terms of like if you're relating it to the way modern web design works, is the difference between like a JPEG and an SVG, right? Then kind of lastly, I haven't tested this, but I've got a hunch. So don't hold me to it completely. But I'm going to guess that there's probably a fairly decent impact on size, and I guess it goes down a little bit by using native shapes rather than imported raster images. Does that make sense? And does that answer your question? If not, please ping me, and I'll try to help clarify a little better. But if not, if it does, let's move on to another one, maybe.
So we're kind of running low on time, but we'll ask a couple more. Do they output as vector when published in HTML5?
Yeah. I'm wonder. Well, so they output identically to any other standard Storyline custom shape, right? So it is interpreting that imported EMF graphic that you've created exactly as it does this circle that it creates natively, if that answers your question. And I think I get where you're going there, but that might be a better answer for me to give for the time that we have.
Okay. I think that the other one is there a menu command to break the shape rather than the Shift-Control-G? And I believe there is. Isn't there in there just a right-click that you can do and ungroup as well?
Yeah. So if you right-click, you go to your group here and then press ungroup, and it does the same thing. You'll notice when I did that, right? Like there is some odd behavior that kicks in. Sometimes it'll rotate objects. Sometimes you may actually lose a bit of an object. For instance, in this badge that I used with my graphics up here, you start to lose stuff. Direct answer though, yeah, right-click it, group, ungroup, or Shift-Control-G, same thing.
Okay. All right. So just in the interest of time, if there are other questions that have come across, we will try to answer those in the webinar recap. Or again, you're welcome to reach out to us. I'm gonna take back over here and just in closing, we appreciate you being here. Just a reminder that we have a lot of templates and tools that can also help you save time on your course development here at eLearning Brothers. We're constantly developing new ones that will use some of these features that we've got, where these features are fairly new to Storyline 3. We are still in the process of developing them, but we'd love to see you register for a free account and come talk to us about all of our products, not just the Storyline products, but we can help you with many of your e-learning needs. So again, thanks to Bill for being here. We appreciate his time, and we thank all of you for being here. And so we'll wrap it up. This recording will go out in the next few hours to those who have registered for the webinar.
Thanks for your time, everybody.
So thank you.